Washington, when Donald F. McGahn II, the White House counsel, moved into his corner office on the West Wing's second floor last January, he chose not to decorate its walls or fill its glass-paneled shelving with personal items. He told colleagues that he travels light because he never knows when he might be asked to leave. But even as a series of firings and resignations roiled the first year of the Trump administration, Mr. McGahn maintained a low profile. Toiling away on judicial appointments and efforts to dismantle regulations, he has rarely accompanied Mr. Trump on trips, and beyond delivering a speech at the annual conference of the Conservative Federalist Society in November, has seldom appeared in public. Now, Mr. McGahn has been thrust squarely into the public eye by the disclosure that in June he threatened to resign in order to stop President Trump from firing Robert S. Mueller III, the special counsel leading the investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election and into whether Mr. Trump committed obstruction of justice. And it is increasingly clear that Mr. McGahn has been at the center of nearly everything Mr. Mueller's obstruction investigation is scrutinizing. Mr. McGahn was the first White House official to hear the Justice Department's concerns that Michael T. Flynn, Mr. Trump's first national security advisor, was vulnerable to blackmail by Russia. On Mr. Trump's orders, he tried to persuade Attorney General Jeff Sessions not to recuse himself from the Russia investigation. He also took part in Mr. Trump's dismissal of the FBI Director James B. Comey. As a participant to those events, Mr. McGahn has been interviewed at length by Mr. Mueller's team as it has sought to understand the president's motivations and thinking. The investigators have also obtained memos, notes and emails about how Mr. McGahn tried to carry out Mr. Trump's decisions in legally appropriate ways, such as objecting to a first draft of Mr. Trump's letter firing Mr. Comey that mentioned the Russia investigation. Mr. McGahn's threat to resign is an example of how he has tried to both help and constrain an idiosyncratic client who hates to be managed and defies the norms of the presidency. Not everyone believes he has been successful. Jack Goldsmith, a Harvard Law School professor and a former top Justice Department official in the George W. Bush administration, wrote last year on the Lawfare blog that Mr. McGahn was either incompetent or ineffective giving bad advice, or advice that his client ignored. Mr. Goldsmith said on Friday that there were too many unanswered questions about what happened in June to judge what it means for Mr. McGahn. He might have acted to protect the president, or himself, or both, from legal trouble, Mr. Goldsmith said. It's hard to know, but the fact that McGahn has stayed in office during the subsequent 7 months implies that there has not been a fundamental breach between the two men, unless perhaps this report signals one. Mr. McGahn, 49, did not respond to an interview request. Several people who know him say he is intensely focused on his mission while maintaining a wry sense of humor and ironic detachment. The stresses can be enough that he will cancel his afternoon meetings and leave the White House. Mr. McGahn has spent most of his professional career in Washington, unusual in an administration that has largely kept out Beltway insiders. His wife, Shannon McGahn, is the staff director of the House Financial Services Committee. But over the years he developed an unusual image for a conservative, growing his hair long and playing guitar for a rock band that specialized in 1980s cover songs until he had to focus on working for Mr. Trump. That background dovetails with a policy record that is more libertarian than classically conservative. His specialty is election law, and at the Patton Boggs law firm, he worked under Benjamin Ginsberg, a veteran Republican campaign lawyer, defending clients against Federal Election Commission investigations into coordination between Republican campaign committees and outside groups. Later, President George W. Bush appointed Mr. McGahn to serve as a commissioner on the Federal Election Commission, where he developed a reputation for unabashedly trying to stop what he believed were its regulatory excesses. But others saw his actions as preventing any regulations on campaign spending. After leaving the agency, he and Mr. Ginsburg left Patton Boggs for another firm, Jones Day. His outlook has always been on the fecklessness of over-regulation by big government, Mr. Ginsburg said, adding that the two would spend countless hours talking about what they saw as the foolishness of Federal Election Commission actions to regulate the unregulatable, that is, political campaign speech. Since last summer, Mr. McGahn has played little role in dealing with the Russia investigation. Because the White House brought in outside lawyers, first Mark E. Kasowitz, and now Ty Cobb, to handle it. But in his more conventional work, which has been overshadowed by the attention given the legal sparring with Mr. Mueller, he has had a major effect on public policy through his support of efforts to dismantle regulations and his role in the administration's aggressive attempt to fill vacancies in the upper reaches of the federal judiciary with deeply conservative judges. Everyone thinks about him in terms of the president's ethics and all of that, but quietly, he has really tried to move the needle on things that conservatives care about a lot, which is the courts and the administrative state, said Reginald Brown, a former associate White House counsel in the Bush administration. That's not as sexy, but it is far more consequential. As the chief architect of the administration's judicial selection process, Mr. McGahn was the driving force behind Mr. Trump's success in appointing not only Neil M. Gorsuch to the Supreme Court, but 12 appeals court judges in Indiana his first year, more than any president in modern history. That pace has not let up. 3 more of Mr. Trump's appellate nominees are pending on the Senate floor. At the Federalist Society convention in November, Mr. McGahn joked that during the presidential campaign, Mr. Trump's team had drawn up 2 lists of potential nominees, one of easily confirmable mainstream and pragmatic picks, and one of picks who held views that would make some people nervous and who were too hot for easy confirmation. I said the first list we'll throw in the trash. And the second list, that's who we're going to put before the U.S. Senate, because I know Leader McConnell will get it done, he said, referring to Senator Mitch McConnell, Republican of Kentucky and the Majority Leader. Several people said Mr. McGahn has told some friends and colleagues that he has considered resigning over the past 6 months, but that Mr. McConnell has repeatedly urged him to stay. Mr. McConnell declined to discuss his private conversations with Mr. McGahn, but said through a spokesman that President Trump picked the finest White House counsel I've ever worked with. With many more judicial vacancies yet to fill and Republicans still narrowly in control of the Senate, a window that might close if there is a Democratic wave in the midterm election this year, several other associates scoffed at the idea that Mr. McGahn would want to step down soon. Mr. McGahn is experiencing a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity that in his wildest dreams when he was going to law school he would never have imagined that he would have been in this position to have a direct effect on the courts for years to come, said Michael Dubka, who served as White House Communications Director for Mr. Trump in the first half of last year. I am sure he's thought about quitting. I doubt there is a person in any West Wing that hasn't thought about it, but this is very important to him, Mr. Dubka said. He views this as going to be his ultimate imprint on American government.